In an extraordinary turn of events that reads like something from a political thriller, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro stood before a federal judge in Manhattan today, declaring himself a prisoner of war just 48 hours after being seized from his presidential residence in a daring U.S. military operation. His defiant plea of not guilty has set the stage for what promises to be one of the most controversial legal and diplomatic battles in recent history. But tonight's story extends far beyond the courtroom walls in New York. President Donald Trump's bold assertion that America will now run Venezuela, combined with his renewed threats to seize Greenland from NATO ally Denmark, has triggered alarm bells from Copenhagen to Caracas, from Brussels to Beijing. World leaders are asking a troubling question. If a sitting head of state can be extracted from his own country by military force, who might be next? Let's begin with the dramatic events that unfolded in the early morning hours of January 3rd. The raid on Caracas. It was just after 2 a.m., Venezuelan time, when residents of Caracas were jolted awake by explosions echoing through the capital city. What many initially mistook for thunder was, in fact, the opening salvo of Operation Absolute Resolve, a massive U.S. military strike involving more than 150 aircraft. Delta Force commandos, working in coordination with CIA operatives who had been covertly embedded in Venezuela since August, descended on the Fuerte Tiuna military complex where President Maduro resided with his wife, Celia Flores. According to President Trump, who watched the operation unfold in real time from a specially configured room at Mar-a-Lago, bullets were flying all over the place as American forces stormed the compound. Maduro and his wife attempted to reach a steel-reinforced safe room, but were apprehended before they could secure themselves inside. Within hours, both were aboard the USS Iwo Jima, and by evening they had landed at Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York. A photograph posted by Trump on social media showed Maduro blindfolded, wearing noise-canceling headphones and a gray Nike sweatsuit, clutching a plastic water bottle. The human cost of the operation remains disputed. Venezuelan and Cuban officials claim more than 80 people were killed, including 32 members of Cuban military and intelligence agencies. U.S. officials have not confirmed these numbers but acknowledge that several American service members were injured, though all are reported to be in good condition. Satellite imagery released over the weekend reveals extensive damage to the Fuerte Tiuna complex. Multiple buildings appeared destroyed or severely damaged, and several vehicles were reduced to rubble in what analysts describe as a precision strike designed to overwhelm Venezuelan defenses quickly. The legal drama unfolds today at precisely noon Eastern Time. Maduro made his first appearance in a Manhattan federal courtroom, marking a surreal moment in international jurisprudence. Wearing jail-issued khaki pants and a blue short-sleeved shirt over an orange undershirt, the man who until 72 hours ago commanded a nation of 28 million people now sat at a defense table with a yellow legal pad. Before entering his plea, Maduro addressed the court with words that will likely echo through history. "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas." U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has charged Maduro and his wife with narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess such weapons. These charges supersede a 2020 indictment based on similar allegations, but notably no longer refer to the Cartel of the Suns as an organized criminal group. Instead, prosecutors now describe it as a corrupt patronage system, aligning with expert assessments of how power actually operated under Maduro's regime. Both Maduro and Flores entered pleas of not guilty. Their legal team is expected to mount a vigorous defense, challenging the very legality of their capture, and arguing that as a sitting head of state, Maduro enjoys sovereign immunity from U.S. prosecution. Todd Blanche, representing the Trump administration, insisted the United States did not violate any laws in arresting the Venezuelan leader. But legal scholars worldwide are questioning that assertion, and the case promises to test fundamental principles of international law. Trump's provocative vision. In the aftermath of the operation, President Trump has painted an audacious vision for Venezuela's future, one that has alarmed allies and adversaries alike. Speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump declared that the United States is now in charge of Venezuela and will run the country through what he calls a judicious transition period. The president has offered few specifics about what this means in practice, but he has been emphatic about one thing: American access to Venezuela's vast oil reserves, the largest proven reserves in the world. Trump stated that U.S. oil companies will spend billions to repair Venezuela's crumbling petroleum infrastructure, which has deteriorated dramatically under Maduro's mismanagement and years of international sanctions. When pressed by reporters about the possibility of boots on the ground, Trump notably refused to rule out a more robust U.S. military presence. "I'm not afraid of boots on the ground," he said. A remarkable statement from a president whose political movement was partly built on opposition to lengthy American military interventions abroad. Behind closed doors in Washington, the response has been mixed. Some congressional staffers and presidential allies have privately expressed deep concern about the long-term consequences of the action, both for U.S. national security and for America's standing in the world. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer warned that Trump's action in Venezuela is only the beginning of a dangerous approach to foreign policy. However, Senate Majority Leader John Thune struck a more measured tone, saying he felt the notification his office received about the operation was sufficient given its sensitivity, though he acknowledged Congress will need more details about Trump's plan to run Venezuela. The Caracas power vacuum. Back in Venezuela, the political situation remains fluid and potentially explosive. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who was reportedly in Russia at the time of the raid, has been ordered by Venezuela's Supreme Court to assume the powers and duties of acting president. Rodriguez's economic record has earned her respect even among American officials. Under her leadership as vice president, Venezuela managed to increase oil production and stabilize its economy somewhat despite increasingly harsh U.S. sanctions. Sources familiar with diplomatic discussions reveal that Rodriguez's brother, Jorge Rodriguez, held talks with the U.S. government in 2025 about his sister leading a post-Maduro transitional government, though those discussions had envisioned Maduro going into exile, not being forcibly removed. President Trump claims Rodriguez is cooperating with American authorities and says he will demand total access for U.S. oil interests. However, the acting president has also issued a defiant statement condemning Maduro's capture as a kidnapping and demanding proof that both he and Flores are alive and unharmed. On the streets of Caracas, reactions have been deeply divided. Some Venezuelans celebrated what they see as the removal of an authoritarian leader who drove their country into economic collapse and forced millions to flee. Others gathered in demonstrations holding portraits of Maduro and pro-government banners, viewing the U.S. action as an illegal invasion. On Sunday, the Venezuelan government issued an emergency order directing police to arrest anyone who supports the U.S. attack, a move that human rights organizations warn could lead to widespread repression. International condemnation. The global reaction to Operation Absolute Resolve has been swift and overwhelmingly critical. In a rare display of unity, the governments of Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, Uruguay, and the outgoing administration in Chile issued a joint statement rejecting the U.S. action. Their declaration warned that the operation could constitute an extremely dangerous precedent for peace and regional security and endanger the civilian population. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed deep concern that rules of international law have not been respected and called the action a dangerous precedent for how relations between states are conducted. A UN Security Council meeting was convened on Monday to address the crisis, though any substantive action faces likely vetoes from permanent members with competing interests. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, whose country has cultivated close ties with Venezuela, issued a particularly strong statement. It is unacceptable for any country, no matter how powerful, to abduct a democratically elected leader from his own country. Turkey and the Turkish people, Erdogan vowed, will continue to stand by the friendly Venezuelan people. In New York's Times Square, hundreds of protesters gathered on Sunday chanting, "Hands off Venezuela," and holding signs reading, "U.S. out," and "No blood for oil." Similar demonstrations occurred in major cities worldwide, with critics arguing that whatever one thinks of Maduro's record, the principle of forcibly removing a sitting head of state threatens the entire framework of international relations. Even America's closest allies have responded with notable restraint. While stopping short of direct criticism, European leaders have emphasized the importance of international law and expressed concern about the precedent being set. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated that Greenland's future is not for others to decide, a comment that takes on new meaning in light of Trump's renewed threats. The Greenland dimension. Which brings us to one of the most unsettling aspects of this story: President Trump's timing in resurrecting his demands for Greenland, the autonomous Danish territory in the Arctic. For years, Trump has expressed interest in acquiring Greenland, citing its strategic location and vast mineral resources. Last month, he appointed Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry as special envoy to Greenland. But his comments following the Venezuela operation have taken on a darker tone. On Sunday, Trump told The Atlantic magazine, "We do need Greenland, absolutely. We need it for defense." Hours earlier, Katie Miller, wife of Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, posted an image on social media showing the American flag superimposed over Greenland with the caption, "Soon." The post sent shockwaves through Copenhagen and Nuuk, Greenland's capital. If Trump could launch a military operation to seize a Latin American president, Danish officials wondered, might he actually be serious about Greenland? Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen issued her strongest statement yet on Sunday. It makes absolutely no sense to talk about the United States needing to take over Greenland. The U.S. has no right to annex any of the 3 countries in the Danish kingdom. She added pointedly, "I would therefore strongly urge the United States to stop the threats against a historically close ally." Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen echoed these sentiments, calling Miller's post disrespectful and stating, "Relations between nations and peoples are built on mutual respect and international law, not on symbolic gestures that disregard our status and our rights." He added firmly, "Our country is not for sale, and our future is not decided by social media posts." Denmark's ambassador to the United States, Jesper Møller Sørensen, reminded Washington that Denmark has significantly boosted its Arctic security efforts in recent years and works closely with America on Arctic defense. Both Denmark and Greenland are covered by NATO's collective defense guarantee, meaning any U.S. military action against Greenland would theoretically trigger the alliance's mutual defense clause. Speaking to reporters Sunday night, Trump dismissed these concerns and doubled down on his position. Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it. When asked how he would justify taking the territory, Trump claimed it would be in the European Union's best interest. The European Union needs us to have it, and they know that. European officials have made no such statements, and the notion has been met with incredulity across the continent. The North Korean reaction. The Venezuela operation has had ripple effects far beyond the Western Hemisphere. Just hours before South Korean President Lee Jae-myung departed for a state visit to China on January 4th, North Korea launched multiple ballistic missiles from near Pyongyang toward the Sea of Japan. The missiles, which North Korean state media later confirmed were hypersonic weapon systems, flew approximately 900 kilometers before splashing down. It was North Korea's first ballistic missile test of 2026 and came after a 2-month pause in such provocations. In a statement released Monday, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un directly referenced recent geopolitical crises and complicated international events as justification for the launches. While not mentioning Venezuela explicitly, analysts universally interpreted this as a reference to the Maduro capture. North Korea has long feared what it calls a decapitation strike by the United States aimed at removing its leadership. For decades, Pyongyang has argued that its nuclear weapons program is necessary as a deterrent against American regime change efforts. The Venezuela operation appears to have validated those fears. Hong Min, an analyst at Seoul's Korea Institute for National Unification, explained, "They likely fear that if the United States so chooses, it could launch a precision strike at any moment, threatening the regime's survival." North Korea's foreign ministry issued a statement condemning the U.S. attack on Venezuela as a serious encroachment of sovereignty and another example that clearly confirms once again the rogue and brutal nature of the U.S. The timing of the missile launches, just as South Korea's president was heading to Beijing for talks expected to focus on North Korean denuclearization, was clearly intended as a message to both Seoul and Beijing not to cooperate with American pressure campaigns. Venezuela's son speaks out, adding a personal dimension to this international crisis. Nicolás Maduro Guerra, the son of the captured president and commonly known as Nicolásito, issued an impassioned statement demanding his parents' return. Speaking via video from an undisclosed location, the younger Maduro warned, "If we normalize the kidnapping of a head of state, no country is safe. Today it's Venezuela, tomorrow it could be any nation that refuses to submit. This is not a regional problem. It is a direct threat to global political stability." He also denounced his own name appearing in the New York indictment, where he was named as a co-conspirator, calling the charges politically motivated. The legal and moral questions. As this story continues to unfold, it raises profound questions that will be debated in courtrooms, legislatures, and academic institutions for years to come. Can a sitting head of state be legally abducted from his own country and tried in the courts of another nation? Does the end of removing an allegedly corrupt and authoritarian leader justify the means of military intervention? What precedent does this set for international relations in an already unstable world? Constitutional law experts are divided. Some argue that Maduro's alleged criminal conduct, if proven, could theoretically override claims of sovereign immunity. Others contend that allowing such extractions would fundamentally undermine the principle of state sovereignty that has formed the bedrock of international order since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Critics of the operation point out that while few would defend Maduro's human rights record or economic management, the decision to use military force to remove him was made unilaterally by the United States without international legal authorization. The UN Security Council did not approve the action. The Organization of American States did not endorse it. No international tribunal ordered Maduro's arrest. Supporters counter that Venezuela's descent into authoritarianism, its role in drug trafficking, and its destabilization of the region justified extraordinary measures. They note that diplomatic efforts to address the crisis had failed for years, and that millions of Venezuelans had fled their country seeking refuge elsewhere, creating a humanitarian catastrophe. What happens next? Looking ahead, several critical developments will shape this story in the coming days and weeks. Maduro's legal team is expected to file multiple motions challenging the jurisdiction of U.S. courts and the legality of his detention. These preliminary legal battles could take months to resolve before any trial on the actual charges begins. In Venezuela, the transition of power to acting President Rodriguez remains uncertain. While she has been ordered by the Supreme Court to assume presidential duties, it's unclear whether she has the political support or military backing to consolidate control. The Venezuelan armed forces, whose loyalty was crucial to Maduro's survival for years, have remained largely silent since his capture. The international community faces difficult choices about whether to recognize Rodriguez as Venezuela's legitimate leader or to treat the current situation as a government-in-exile scenario. President Trump has promised more details about his administration's plans for Venezuela, including how long the U.S. intends to maintain its role there and what conditions would trigger an American withdrawal. Congressional oversight committees have scheduled briefings with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for this week. And hanging over everything is the question of whether Trump's threats against Greenland and his references to making Canada the 51st state represent serious policy objectives or negotiating tactics designed to extract concessions from allies. Denmark has made clear it will not negotiate over Greenland's status. NATO allies are watching nervously to see whether the Venezuela operation represents a one-time action or the beginning of a more aggressive U.S. foreign policy posture. Closing thoughts. What we are witnessing may be a turning point in how great powers interact with smaller nations and how international law is applied or selectively ignored when it proves inconvenient. The image of Nicolás Maduro, blindfolded and bound, being flown out of his own country aboard a U.S. warship, will resonate for years. For some, it will symbolize justice finally catching up with a corrupt autocrat. For others, it will represent a dangerous precedent that makes every leader of a small or medium-sized nation vulnerable to the whims of more powerful states. President Trump has made it clear he sees American power as a tool to be used boldly and, in his view, in defense of American interests. His critics warn that this approach risks turning the United States into an international pariah and undermining the very alliances and institutions that have helped maintain relative peace and stability since World War II. In the courtroom today, Nicolás Maduro asked that his notes be respected and that he be allowed to keep them as the legal process unfolds. It was a small gesture of defiance from a man who, regardless of his alleged crimes, was, until last week, the elected leader of a sovereign nation. The judge granted his request. Whether international law will ultimately grant him or any future leader in similar circumstances more substantial protections remains an open and deeply troubling question. This is a story with no clear heroes, multiple villains depending on one's perspective, and consequences that will ripple across the globe for decades to come. The capture of Nicolás Maduro may have taken only a few hours, but its impact on the international order will take years to fully understand. We will continue to follow this story as it develops. Coming up after the break, we'll have more on the diplomatic fallout and speak with former ambassadors about what this means for U.S. relations with Latin America and Europe.